The frigid winter wind howled across the Colorado plains like a wounded beast, driving snow in blinding sheets as Newsom stumbled forward through knee-deep drifts. Blood from her cut feet stained the pristine white snow a horrific crimson, each step sending daggers of pain through her body. She couldn't feel her toes anymore, perhaps a blessing considering the state they must be in, but she pressed on, knowing that stopping meant certain death in the bitter December cold of 1873. The lights of the small homestead appeared like a mirage through the swirling white curtain of snow. Catherine blinked hard, afraid her mind was playing cruel tricks after hours of desperate flight. But no, the warm glow remained, growing stronger as she forced her frozen limbs forward. Her cotton nightdress, torn and soaked through, clung to her shivering body like a death shroud. "Help!" she tried to call, but her voice emerged as nothing more than a ragged whisper lost in the howling wind. "Please, help!" Just as her strength finally gave out, Catherine collapsed at the edge of the property, her consciousness fading as quickly as her body heat. The last thing she registered was the sound of boots crunching through snow and a deep voice calling out in alarm. Caleb Crawford had been securing his livestock for the night when he spotted what appeared to be a ghost drifting through the blizzard toward his cabin. Only when the figure collapsed did he realize it was a woman barefoot and dressed in nothing but a nightgown in the middle of the worst storm Colorado had seen in years. "Good Lord above," he exclaimed, rushing to her side. He scooped the half-frozen woman into his arms, shocked at how light she felt. Her feet were raw and bleeding, leaving a disturbing trail behind her in the snow. Caleb didn't hesitate, carrying her quickly toward the warmth of his cabin. Inside, the fireplace cast a warm glow across the modest but comfortable interior. Caleb laid the unconscious woman on his bed, quickly gathering clean cloths, a basin of warm water, and what medical supplies he had on hand. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady, a good sign, though her skin was deathly pale with alarming blue tinges around her lips and fingertips. "Miss, can you hear me?" Caleb asked, gently patting her cheek as he wrapped her in thick blankets. There was no response. With practiced hand skills learned from years on cattle drives where doctors were scarce, he began to carefully clean her lacerated feet. The cuts were deep in places, embedded with splinters, ice, and small stones. Working methodically, he removed the debris, applied a salve of his own making, and wrapped each foot in clean bandages. Only when he finished tending to her most immediate injuries did Caleb notice the bruising around her wrists and a darkening mark on her cheek. Someone had hurt this woman, hurt her badly enough that she'd fled barefoot into a deadly blizzard rather than stay wherever she'd been. The thought kindled a slow burning anger in his chest. 3 hours passed before Catherine stirred. The first sensation was warmth, blessed, wonderful warmth enveloping her body. Then came the pain, sharp and insistent, radiating from her feet. A soft groan escaped her lips as her eyelids fluttered open. A man's face came into focus, weathered by sun and wind, with kind brown eyes and a concerned expression. He sat in a chair beside the bed, alert despite the late hour. When he noticed her awake, relief washed over his features. "Easy now," he said in a gentle baritone. "You're safe." Catherine instinctively recoiled, pressing back against the headboard as panic flooded her system. The events of the night crashed back into her consciousness, the shouting, the blows, her desperate flight into the storm. "It's all right," the man said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "My name's Caleb Crawford. This is my cabin, found you collapsed in the snow." Catherine glanced around wildly, assessing her surroundings. A small but tidy cabin, sparsely furnished, a roaring fire in the hearth. Her feet, she looked down to see them carefully bandaged. "My feet," she whispered, her voice raw, "had to clean and wrap them," Caleb explained. "They were in pretty bad shape. What's your name, miss?" She hesitated, wondering how much to reveal. "Catherine," she finally answered. "Catherine Newsom." Caleb nodded, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Miss Newsom, I don't mean to pry, but no one runs barefoot through a blizzard without good reason. His expression grew serious. Who hurt you? Catherine's eyes filled with tears that spilled over before she could stop them. My uncle, she admitted, the words catching in her throat. After my parents died last spring, I had nowhere else to go. He took me in, but tonight She couldn't finish, shame and fear closing her throat. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. You don't need to say more if you don't want to, but you're safe here, I promise you that. He'll come looking for me, Catherine whispered, genuine terror in her voice. When he realizes I'm gone, let him try, Caleb said with quiet steel in his voice. This is my land. No one comes onto it meaning harm without answering to me. Something in his tone made Catherine believe him. She nodded weakly, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Rest now, Caleb said, standing. I'll keep watch. We can figure things out in the morning. Thank you, Catherine murmured, her eyelids growing heavy despite her fear. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. No need for that, he replied, adding another log to the fire. Any decent man would do the same. As Catherine drifted back to sleep, her last thought was that Caleb Crawford seemed more than just a decent man. He seemed like the answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was making. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through frost-covered windows, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Catherine awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement in the cabin. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was then. It all came flooding back. Her uncle's rage, her desperate flight, the cowboy who had saved her life. Caleb turned from the stove when he heard her stir. Morning, he said. How are you feeling? Catherine tried to sit up and winced at the pain in her feet. Like I ran barefoot through a snowstorm, she answered with a weak attempt at humor. A small smile tugged at Caleb's lips. Understandable, hungry. Her stomach answered with an embarrassing growl, and Catherine realized she hadn't eaten since the previous morning. Yes, thank you. Caleb brought her a plate with eggs, bacon, and a thick slice of bread slathered with butter. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep your strength up. Catherine accepted the food gratefully. As she ate, she studied her host more carefully in the daylight. Caleb Crawford was perhaps 30 years old, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling much now. His dark brown hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck. I need to check your bandages after you eat, he said, pouring her a cup of coffee. Then we should talk about what happens next, Catherine nodded, dread pooling in her stomach at the thought. What would happen next? She had no money, no possessions beyond the nightgown she wore, and nowhere to go. And her uncle, a prominent businessman in Colorado City, would surely be looking for her. After breakfast, Caleb knelt beside the bed and gently unwrapped her feet. Catherine winced as the bandages came away, but was surprised to see the cuts already looked cleaner. You have a healer's touch, Mr. Crawford, she observed. Caleb, please, he corrected, carefully cleaning her wounds with warm water infused with herbs. And I've patched up enough injuries over the years. Man can't work cattle without learning some doctoring. You're a cattleman, he nodded. Small operation compared to some, but it's mine. Got about 200 head on 500 acres. He applied more of his homemade salve to her feet. This will help with the pain and prevent festering. As he worked, Catherine found her courage. About what happens next? My uncle, your uncle, Caleb interrupted, his voice hardening, is the one who did this to you. He gestured to her bruised wrists and the mark on her face that had darkened to a purplish hue overnight. Catherine nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Gerald Blackwood. He's my mother's brother. When my parents died of fever last spring, he was my only living relative. He brought me to Colorado City to live with him, but... She trailed off. But he's not the kind, generous uncle he pretended to be, Caleb finished for her. No, Catherine whispered. Last night was the worst it's been. He was drinking and he tried to. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Caleb's expression told her he understood. I fought him off and ran, she continued after a moment. I didn't even think to grab shoes or a coat. I just ran until I couldn't anymore. That's when I saw your cabin. Caleb finished wrapping her feet in fresh bandages, his movements gentle despite the anger she could sense simmering beneath his calm exterior. This Blackwood, he's got influence in town. He owns the largest mercantile in Colorado City, Catherine confirmed. Everyone knows him. Everyone respects him. Her voice turned bitter. No one would believe what he's really like. Caleb stood, pacing the small cabin. You can stay here as long as you need, he said finally. It's not much, but you'll be safe. My nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and I rarely get visitors, especially in winter. Relief washed over Catherine. Thank you. I promise I won't be a burden. I can cook and clean and sew. You're not a servant, Caleb interrupted firmly. Right now, you need to rest and heal. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Something in his kindness broke through the walls Catherine had built around her heart since her parents' death. Tears welled in her eyes. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. My mother ran away from my father when I was 8 years old, he said quietly. She took me with her, but we had nowhere to go. A stranger took us in, gave us shelter when we needed it most. I never forgot that kindness, he shrugged. Sometimes people just need help, that's all there is to it. Catherine wiped away her tears. Thank you, she said again, the words woefully inadequate for what she felt. Caleb nodded, suddenly looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. I need to check on the cattle. Will you be all right here for a while? Yes, of course. There's more coffee in the pot and books on that shelf if you get bored. He pulled on his heavy coat and hat. I won't be gone long. Keep the door locked. After Caleb left, Catherine sat in the quiet cabin, listening to the crackling fire and taking stock of her situation. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt safe. It was a precious feeling, one she hadn't expected to experience again. She looked around the cabin more carefully. It was simple but well built, with one main room containing the bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small cooking area, and a stone fireplace. A curtained alcove likely held Caleb's personal items. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprising in a cowboy's cabin filled with volumes on history, animal husbandry, and several novels. Everything was neat and orderly, speaking to a man who took pride in his space despite living alone. The thought made Catherine wonder about Caleb Crawford. Why was a man like him kind, capable, handsome, living alone in this remote cabin? The answer, she supposed, didn't matter. What mattered was that he had saved her life and offered protection when she needed it most. For now, that was enough. Days passed, blending into one another as Catherine recovered from her ordeal. Her feet healed slowly, the deepest cuts taking longest to close. Caleb proved to be an attentive but unobtrusive host, giving her space while ensuring she had everything she needed. On her 4th day at the cabin, Catherine insisted on cooking dinner as a small way to repay his kindness. She made a hearty stew with the ingredients available, and the pleasure on Caleb's face when he tasted it was worth the effort it took to stand at the stove. This is the best meal I've had in years, he declared, helping himself to a second bowl. Catherine smiled, pleased. My mother was an excellent cook. She taught me everything she knew. She taught you well. Caleb broke off a piece of bread to sop up the last of his stew. What did your parents do, if you don't mind my asking? My father was a schoolteacher, Catherine answered, memories of her kind, scholarly father warming her. My mother gave piano lessons. We lived in a small town in Missouri, nothing fancy, but we were happy. And then the fever came, Caleb said softly. Catherine nodded, the grief still fresh. It swept through our town last spring. Many died, including both my parents within days of each other. She stared into her bowl. My uncle was my only living relative. He wrote offering to take me in, saying a young woman shouldn't be alone in the world. Sounds generous on the surface, Caleb observed. Yes, he even sent money for my train ticket to Colorado. Catherine's expression darkened. When I arrived, everything was fine at first. He gave me my own room in his house behind the store, bought me new dresses, introduced me to people in town. Everyone told me how lucky I was to have such a caring uncle. She fell silent, remembering the slow change in her uncle's behavior, the proprietary touches that became more frequent. The comments about how much she owed him, the way he began to drink more heavily in the evenings. When did it change? Caleb asked quietly. About 2 months after I arrived. Small things at first, criticizing what I wore, monitoring where I went, who I spoke to. Then came the first time he hit me. Catherine's voice became distant. I dropped and broke a piece of his mother's china while dusting, the look in his eyes. I knew then what kind of man he really was. Caleb's hand tightened around his spoon. Did anyone in town suspect? Catherine shook her head. He was always careful not to leave marks where people could see, and who would believe me over him? He's Gerald Blackwood, respected businessman. I'm just a penniless orphan he graciously took in. You're much more than that, Caleb said with unexpected intensity. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Both had known loss, had faced adversity, had somehow managed to retain kindness despite it all. Catherine looked away first, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation, unmarried, sharing a cabin miles from town. Yet she couldn't bring herself to care about societal conventions, not when the alternative was returning to her uncle's protection. What will you do? Caleb asked, as if reading her thoughts. When you're fully healed, I don't know, Catherine admitted. I can't go back to him, but I have no money, no possessions. You could go to Denver, Caleb suggested. Bigger city, more opportunities for work. Your uncle would have a harder time finding you there. The idea held appeal, but also terror. I've never been to a city that size, and how would I get there? How would I support myself until I found work? Caleb seemed about to answer when a knock at the door froze them both. No one ever visited the isolated cabin, especially in winter. Catherine's heart pounded as Caleb rose from the table, motioning for her to stay quiet. He took his rifle from beside the door before calling out, "Who's there?" "Marshall Williams from Colorado City," came the reply. "Looking for Caleb Crawford." Caleb glanced at Catherine, who had gone pale. "Get behind the curtain," he whispered urgently. "Don't make a sound." Catherine nodded, rising carefully to avoid making her chair scrape. She slipped behind the curtain, separating the sleeping area from the main room just as Caleb opened the door. "Marshall," Caleb greeted the visitor with forced casualness. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Sorry to disturb you, Crawford," the marshal said, stamping snow from his boots as he entered. "I'm looking for a missing woman. Catherine Newsom, niece of Gerald Blackwood. She disappeared from his home 5 nights ago during the blizzard." From her hiding place, Catherine held her breath, heart hammering so loudly she feared the marshal might hear it. "Haven't seen anyone," Caleb replied. "Been pretty isolated out here since the storm." The marshal looked around the cabin, his gaze lingering on the 2 bowls on the table. "Expecting company?" Caleb didn't miss a beat. "Just hungry. Been working since dawn." Marshal Williams nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "Blackwood is offering a substantial reward for information leading to his niece's return. Says she's not right in the head, prone to fits of hysteria and delusions." Catherine bit her lip to keep from making a sound, anger burning through her at her uncle's lies. "That's so," Caleb's voice remained neutral. "Shame about the girl. But if she ran off in that blizzard with no proper clothing?" He left the implication hanging, the marshal sighed. "That's what I told Blackwood. No one could survive a night like that without shelter, but he insists she must be alive, maybe taken in by someone." His gaze sharpened. "You sure you haven't seen anything unusual? No strangers passing through?" "Marshal," Caleb said firmly. "I've been ranching this land for 8 years. You know I keep to myself. If I'd found a half-frozen woman, I'd have brought her to town for proper medical care." The lie was delivered with such conviction that Catherine almost believed it herself. "Fair enough," the marshal conceded. "If you do hear anything, send word to town. Blackwood's beside himself with worry." "Will do," Caleb promised, walking the marshal to the door. Only when hoofbeats faded into the distance did Caleb motion for Catherine to come out from hiding. She emerged shaking, tears streaming down her face. "He's looking for me," she whispered, "and he's telling everyone I'm insane." Caleb crossed to her, placing steadying hands on her shoulders. "I won't let him find you," he promised. "But we need a plan. You can't stay hidden here forever." "What can I do?" Catherine asked desperately. "If I go to town, someone will recognize me. If I try to leave on my own, I have no money, no resources." Caleb paced the cabin, thinking. "I have a friend in Denver, Daniel Thompson. Served with him during the war. He and his wife might take you in until you find your feet." Hope flickered in Catherine's chest. "You would do that for me. Contact your friend." "I would," Caleb confirmed. "But getting you to Denver safely is the challenge. It's nearly 100 miles and your uncle has people looking for you." Catherine sank into a chair, the magnitude of her situation overwhelming her. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door. I'm so sorry." Caleb knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Don't apologize. None of this is your fault." His eyes, warm and sincere, met hers. "We'll figure this out together, I promise." The touch of his hands around hers sent an unexpected warmth through Catherine, feeling so foreign after months of fear that she scarcely recognized it. In Caleb Crawford's eyes, she saw not just compassion, but something deeper that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the emotions swelling in her heart. Neither of them acknowledged the current flowing between them, invisible but undeniable. There were more pressing concerns than the unexpected connection forming between a wounded young woman and the cowboy who had saved her. But as they sat together, planning her escape to Denver, both were acutely aware that something had changed. Something that might complicate matters considerably. 2 weeks passed with no further visits from the marshal or anyone else. Catherine's feet healed enough that she could walk without pain, though prolonged standing still caused discomfort. During this time, she and Caleb settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine, she tending to the cabin while he worked with his cattle, then sharing meals and conversation in the evenings. Catherine learned that Caleb had served in the Union Army during the Civil War, had come west afterwards seeking a fresh start, and had built his modest ranch through years of hard work. He'd been married once, briefly, to a woman who had found ranch life too isolated and difficult. She'd returned to her family in Kansas after less than a year, leaving Caleb wary of relationships but not bitter. For his part, Caleb discovered Catherine's quick intelligence, her love of books and music, her resilience in the face of tremendous loss. He admired the way she refused to be defined by her circumstances, how she faced each day with quiet determination despite the uncertainty of her future. Neither of them acknowledged the growing attraction between them. It seemed inappropriate given Catherine's vulnerable position and their temporary arrangement. Yet it was there in the lingering glances, the way their hands sometimes brushed when passing items at the table, the comfortable silences that fell between them in the evenings. On a clear, cold January day, Caleb announced he needed to ride into Colorado City for supplies. "Is that safe?" Catherine asked, alarmed at the thought of him potentially encountering her uncle. "I go into town every month or so," Caleb explained. "It would look suspicious if I changed my routine now. Besides, I can gather information about the search for you." Catherine nodded, seeing the logic but still feeling uneasy. "Please be careful." "Always am," he assured her with a small smile. "I'll be back before dark." "Keep the door locked, and if anyone comes, hide and stay quiet," Catherine finished. "I know." Caleb hesitated at the door. "I've been thinking about getting you to Denver. I have a wagon and team we could use, but we'd need to travel through Colorado City." "Too risky with your uncle still actively searching." "What if we waited until spring?" Catherine suggested. "Surely he can't keep up the search forever." "Men like your uncle don't give up easily," Caleb said grimly, "especially when their pride is at stake." "But I have another idea I want to look into while I'm in town. We'll talk when I get back. After Caleb left, Catherine busied herself with chores to keep her mind off worrying. She baked bread, mended a tear in one of Caleb's shirts, and finally settled with one of his books, a collection of poetry by Tennyson that surprised her with its well-worn pages. She hadn't expected a cattle rancher to be fond of poetry. The sun was beginning its descent when Catherine heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded her until she realized there were multiple horses, not just Caleb returning alone. Panic seized her as she quickly doused the lamp and hurried to hide in the small storage cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen area. Caleb had shown it to her as a hiding place if ever needed. The voices outside grew louder. Catherine recognized Caleb's deep tones, but couldn't make out the words or identify the other speaker. Heart-pounding, she waited in the darkness of the cellar, straining to hear. The cabin door opened, footsteps entered, and then Caleb's voice came clearly. "Catherine. It's safe to come out if you're hiding." Confused but trusting him, Catherine pushed up the trapdoor and climbed out of the cellar. In the main room stood Caleb alongside a woman of perhaps 50 years with gray-streaked dark hair and kind eyes. "This is Martha Wilson," Caleb introduced. "She's the midwife in Colorado City and an old friend. Martha, this is Catherine Newsom." The older woman stepped forward, her assessing gaze taking in Catherine's appearance. "So you're the young lady who has the whole town in an uproar," she said, though her tone held no accusation. "Martha knows about your situation," Caleb explained. "She's here to help." Catherine looked uncertainly between them. "I don't understand." Martha sat at the table, gesturing for Catherine to join her. "Gerald Blackwood has been a thorn in my side for years," she stated matter-of-factly. "He's not the upstanding citizen he pretends to be. I've treated more than one young woman who worked in his home for mysterious injuries." Catherine's eyes widened. "You know what he's really like." "Some of us do," Martha confirmed, "but he has money and influence. Speaking out against him has consequences, as I discovered when he managed to convince half the town I was practicing witchcraft rather than midwifery." She snorted derisively. "Fortunately, babies continue to be born regardless of town gossip, and my skills are needed." "I encountered Martha at the general store," Caleb said, setting down packages of supplies. "She recognized me and asked pointed questions about whether I'd found anything unusual during the blizzard." "Subtlety has never been my strong suit," Martha admitted with a small smile. When Caleb's reaction confirmed my suspicions, we spoke privately. "But why would you help me?" Catherine asked. "You're risking much by being here." Martha's expression softened. "Child, I brought your mother into this world and delivered you as well, though you wouldn't remember. When I heard Elizabeth's daughter was coming to live with Blackwood after her parents' deaths, I worried. But there was nothing I could do without proof of mistreatment." "You knew my mother," Catherine whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "Elizabeth and I grew up together in Missouri," Martha explained. "We lost touch after she married your father and I moved west, but I never forgot her. When I heard what happened in the blizzard, I prayed you'd found shelter." She reached across the table to squeeze Catherine's hand. "And it seems you did." Catherine looked to Caleb, who was watching the exchange with quiet intensity. "Why didn't you tell me you were bringing someone back with you?" "I couldn't be certain Martha would help until we spoke," he replied, "and I wouldn't risk your safety on an uncertainty." "What happens now?" Catherine asked, looking between them. Martha straightened. "I have a plan to get you safely away from Colorado City, away from your uncle's reach, but you'll need to trust me and it will involve some risk." "I'll take any risk to be free of him," Catherine stated firmly. "Good," Martha nodded approvingly, "because in 3 days' time you're going to die." The stunned silence that followed Martha's declaration lasted several heartbeats before Caleb spoke. "You want to fake her death," he said, comprehension dawning. "That's brilliant." "It's the only way to ensure Blackwood stops looking for her," Martha confirmed. "A man like him might pursue a runaway indefinitely, but even he can't chase a ghost." Catherine's mind raced. "But how? There would need to be a body, a funeral." "Not necessarily," Martha said. What we need is a believable story and enough evidence to support it. She leaned forward, outlining her plan. 3 days from now, I'll come to town in a state of distress, reporting that while gathering herbs along the river south of town, I discovered items belonging to a young woman, a torn nightgown, perhaps a lock of hair. The area has treacherous ice this time of year. Will imply you fell through while fleeing, your body swept away by the current. Without a body, will people believe it? Catherine asked. Bodies lost in winter rivers sometimes don't surface until spring thaw, if ever, Caleb noted. It's a common enough tragedy. Precisely, Martha agreed. Blackwood may insist on searching, but the river is dangerous this time of year. After a few days of fruitless effort, even he will have to accept the inevitable. And while they're searching the river, I'll be. Catherine trailed off, looking to Caleb. On your way to Denver with me, he finished. Once the town is focused on the river search, we can slip away unnoticed. I'll take you to my friends there, as we discussed. Catherine tried to process the plan. It was daring, potentially dangerous, but it offered a chance at freedom she hadn't dared hope for. My uncle might still pursue the matter if he's suspicious. He may, Martha acknowledged, but a man like Blackwood cares deeply about his public image. Once the town accepts your tragic death, he'll play the part of the grieving uncle. Continuing to search would make him appear unhinged. There's another aspect to consider, Caleb added quietly. If Catherine Newsom is legally dead, she can start fresh with a new identity in Denver. Blackwood would have no legal claim even if he somehow discovered she was alive. The implications sank in. A new name, a new beginning, freedom from her past and the man who had made her life a nightmare. I'll do it, Catherine decided, squaring her shoulders. Whatever it takes. Martha smiled approvingly. Good girl. You have your mother's spirit. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small bundle. I've brought some items to help with your disguise for the journey: hair dye, spectacles, different clothing than what you'd normally wear. You've thought of everything, Catherine marveled. When you've lived as long as I have, child, you learn to be thorough. Martha stood. I should return to town before my absence is noticed. Caleb, you'll need to prepare for the journey. Once news of Catherine's discovery spreads, you'll have only a short window to depart unnoticed. After Martha left with promises to return in 3 days, Catherine and Caleb sat in thoughtful silence. The plan was in motion, there was no turning back now. Are you certain about this? Caleb finally asked. Once we do this, Catherine Newsom will be dead in the eyes of the law. Everything from your past, your identity, your parents' memory will be left behind. Catherine considered his words carefully. My parents live in my heart, not in my name. They would want me safe and free, even if it meant such a deception. She looked at him steadily. What about you? You're risking everything to help me, your ranch, your reputation. Why? Caleb held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Some things are worth the risk, he said simply. Catherine felt her cheeks warm under his intense gaze. The unacknowledged attraction between them suddenly seemed to fill the small cabin, making it difficult to breathe. I should start preparing, she said, breaking the moment. We have much to do before Martha returns. Caleb nodded, rising from the table. I'll check on the livestock, make arrangements for their care while we're gone. As he pulled on his coat, he paused at the door. Catherine, she looked up, meeting his eyes. I don't regret finding you that night, he said quietly, not for a moment. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing behind him. Catherine sat alone, her heart pounding with emotions she dared not name. In 3 days, she would leave behind everything she had been. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. And somehow, the knowledge that Caleb would be beside her made it all seem possible. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of careful preparation. Catherine used the hair dye Martha had provided to transform her auburn locks to a deep brown. Caleb gathered supplies for their journey, prepared letters for neighbors who would check on his livestock, and readied the wagon. On the morning of the 3rd day, tension filled the cabin as they waited for Martha's return. According to their plan, she would have already discovered Catherine's belongings by the river and raised the alarm in town. By nightfall, the search would be underway, creating the distraction they needed to slip away unnoticed. "Are you nervous?" Caleb asked, finding Catherine standing by the window watching the road. "Yes," she admitted, "but strangely I also feel free, like I'm standing on the edge of a new life." Caleb moved to stand beside her. "You are, whatever happens in Denver, you'll be free to choose your own path." Catherine turned to face him. "I can never repay what you've done for me." "I don't want repayment," he said softly. The air between them thickened with unspoken words. Catherine became acutely aware of how close they were standing, how easy it would be to close the small distance between them. Before either could act on the impulse, hoofbeats sounded outside. Martha had arrived. The older woman bustled in with a triumphant expression. "It's done," she announced. "The whole town is in an uproar. Blackwood himself is organizing search parties along the river. He believes it." Catherine asked, hardly daring to hope. "He's suspicious by nature," Martha replied. "But the evidence was convincing. The torn nightgown with blood stains, caught on branches at a notorious thin spot in the ice. Your distinctive hair ribbon nearby." She smiled grimly. "He's playing the part of the devastated uncle perfectly, offering rewards for your recovery, dead or alive." "How long do we have?" Caleb asked. "The search is concentrated south of town along the river. You should leave tonight, taking the North Trail. By the time anyone thinks to look elsewhere, you'll be well on your way to Denver." Martha handed Catherine a bundle. "New papers for you, dear. From now on, you're Claire Nelson, a young widow traveling to Denver to live with relatives after your husband's death." Catherine opened the bundle, finding expertly forged documents, a marriage certificate, a death certificate for her fictional husband, letters of introduction. "How did you manage this?" Martha's eyes twinkled. "I've learned many useful skills in my years." "Not all of them related to delivering babies." Caleb checked his pocket watch. "We should leave within the hour, while there's still enough light to navigate the initial stretch of trail." Martha nodded, then pulled Catherine into a warm embrace. "Your mother would be proud of your courage," she whispered. "Be safe, child, be happy." "Thank you," Catherine whispered back, fighting tears, "for everything." Martha turned to Caleb next. "Take care of her," she said, her tone making it clear the words were both a request and a warning. "With my life," Caleb promised solemnly. After Martha departed, Catherine and Caleb made final preparations in silent efficiency. The gravity of what they were about to do hung in the air, leaving behind Caleb's home, embarking on a dangerous journey, starting new lives. As the sun began to set, Caleb loaded the last of their supplies into the wagon. "It's time," he said quietly. Catherine took one last look around the cabin that had been her sanctuary. So much had changed since that snowy night when she had collapsed at the edge of Caleb's property. She had arrived broken, terrified, with no hope for the future. Now, despite the dangers ahead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in far too long: possibility. "I'm ready," she said, pulling on the plain brown coat Martha had provided for her disguise. Outside, the evening air was sharp with cold as Caleb helped Catherine onto the wagon seat. Their breath formed clouds in the fading light as he checked the harness one final time, then climbed up beside her. "Denver is about 5 days' journey in good conditions," he explained, taking up the reins. "We'll avoid the main roads and towns where possible." Catherine nodded, drawing her coat tighter against the chill. "What will you do after you've delivered me safely to your friends?" Caleb glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what?" His eyes held hers for a long moment. "On whether I have a reason to stay." The implication of his words hung between them as the wagon began to move, carrying them away from the only safety Catherine had known and toward an uncertain future. The first night on the trail, they made camp in a sheltered hollow several miles from Caleb's ranch. The small campfire provided minimal warmth against the January cold, but neither complained. Freedom was worth some discomfort. Try to get some sleep, Caleb advised, spreading blankets in the back of the wagon where Catherine would sleep. I'll keep watch. You need rest too, Catherine protested. I'm used to long nights during calving season, he assured her. I'll wake you at dawn. Catherine hesitated, then reached out to touch his arm. Thank you, Caleb, not just for today, but for everything since that night you found me. In the firelight, his expression softened. Get some rest, Catherine, Claire, she corrected gently. I need to get used to my new name. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Claire, then, good night. As Catherine, now Claire, settled into her blankets in the wagon, she found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. Her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead in Denver, worries about discovery during their journey, and increasingly confusion about her feelings for the man who sat silently by the fire keeping watch over her. She had known Caleb Crawford for less than a month, yet in that short time he had become the most important person in her world. He had saved her life, protected her, risked everything to help her escape. But was her growing attachment to him merely gratitude or something deeper? And what of his feelings? His words before they left, whether I have a reason to stay, suggested he might feel something beyond simple kindness toward her. The uncertainty of it all kept her awake long into the night, watching the stars through a gap in the wagon cover, and listening to the occasional sounds of Caleb moving around the campsite. Their journey continued over the next 4 days, each taking them farther from Colorado City and closer to Denver. They traveled mostly by night and early morning, resting during daylight hours in secluded locations. Claire grew accustomed to her new identity, practicing her fictional history in case they encountered strangers who asked questions. On the 3rd day, they passed close to a small settlement and decided to risk stopping for supplies. Caleb went alone while Claire waited with the wagon hidden in a copse of trees. Did anyone recognize you? She asked anxiously when he returned. No, he assured her, but there was talk of the tragic death of Gerald Blackwood's niece. Apparently they've called off the active search along the river. The town is planning a memorial service next Sunday. Claire felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. So it worked. I'm officially dead. You're officially free, Caleb corrected gently. Their eyes met, and Claire felt a now familiar warmth bloom in her chest. Throughout their journey, moments like this had become more frequent lingering glances, casual touches that seemed to carry more meaning, conversations that grew deeper and more personal with each passing mile. Yet neither had spoken openly about what might lie between them. The uncertainty of their future made such discussions seem premature, even inappropriate. Claire was still healing from her trauma. Caleb was leaving behind his home and livelihood. There were more pressing matters than the feelings developing between them. Or so Claire told herself, even as she found herself watching Caleb when he wasn't looking, memorizing the lines of his face. The sound of his laugh on the rare occasions something amused him. On the evening of the 5th day, the sprawling expanse of Denver came into view from their vantage point on a hilltop. In the fading light, the city's buildings spread across the valley, smoke rising from countless chimneys, the South Platte River cutting through its center. We made it, Claire breathed, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. We'll reach my friend Daniel's place by nightfall, Caleb said. He lives on the outskirts of the city. You'll be safe there while you decide your next steps. Claire nodded, though a knot formed in her stomach at the implied finality of his words. Their journey was ending. Soon she would begin her new life in Denver and Caleb. What would Caleb do, have you decided? She asked softly. Whether you'll return to your ranch. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. Not yet. The answer didn't satisfy Claire, but she didn't press further. As the wagon began its descent toward Denver, she silently cataloged the questions she couldn't bring herself to ask aloud. Would he stay in Denver for a while? Would he visit her? Did he feel the same confusing, powerful emotions that had been growing inside her since those early days in his cabin? Daniel and Margaret Thompson, lived in a modest but comfortable home on the northeastern edge of Denver. Daniel, a bearded man with friendly eyes, had been corresponding with Caleb since receiving his letter explaining the situation. He greeted them with warm handshakes and ushered them inside, where his wife had prepared a hot meal. "Claire, you're welcome to stay with us as long as you need," Margaret assured her over dinner. "Daniel's told me something of your circumstances. You're safe here." "Thank you," Claire replied, humbled by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't want to impose nonsense," Daniel interrupted. "Any friend of Caleb's is welcome in our home. Besides, Margaret has been hoping for female company. I'm afraid I'm not much good at conversation about anything but horses and carpentry." Margaret smiled affectionately at her husband. "It will be nice having another woman around. And as it happens, my sister runs a small dress shop in the city. She mentioned needing help just last week. If you're interested, it could be a good position for you while you get settled." The prospect of employment so soon after arriving lifted a weight from Claire's shoulders. "I would be very interested. I'm a fair hand with a needle." "Excellent. I'll speak with her tomorrow," Margaret said. "Now, you both must be exhausted from your journey. We've prepared rooms for each of you upstairs." After dinner, Daniel showed Caleb and Claire to their respective rooms. For the first time in days, Claire would sleep in a proper bed, under a solid roof. The small, clean room with its patchwork quilt and curtained window seemed luxurious after nights spent in the wagon. As she was about to enter her room, Caleb paused in the hallway. "Claire," he said quietly, "can we talk tomorrow? There are things I need to say." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "Of course. Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Claire." Sleep came easier than expected, the exhaustion of their journey finally catching up with her. Claire woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee from downstairs. For a moment, disorientation struck her. This wasn't Caleb's cabin or the wagon. Then memory returned. Denver, the Thompsons' safety, and Caleb wanting to talk. She dressed quickly in one of the simple dresses Martha had provided, ran a brush through her now dark hair, and headed downstairs. Margaret was alone in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. "Good morning." "There's coffee on the stove and porridge keeping warm if you're hungry," she greeted Claire cheerfully. "Thank you." "Where are Daniel and Caleb?" Claire asked, trying to sound casual. "Gone to the lumberyard. Daniel's building a new stable and Caleb offered to help." Margaret's eyes held a knowing look. "They should be back by midday," Claire nodded, disappointment and relief warring within her. Whatever conversation Caleb wanted to have would have to wait. The morning passed pleasantly as Margaret showed Claire around the property and explained more about her sister's dress shop. By noon, Claire had agreed to meet with Mrs. Porter the following day to discuss employment. The prospect of earning her own living, of building a self-sufficient life in this new city, filled her with determination. When Daniel and Caleb returned, they brought news from the city. "There's a cattle buyer in town looking for good breeding stock," Daniel mentioned over lunch. "Caleb's thinking of returning to his ranch to bring some of his herd to market here." Claire's spoon halted halfway to her mouth. "You're going back," Caleb met her gaze across the table. "Just temporarily. I need to check on the ranch, make arrangements for the cattle. I won't be gone more than 2 weeks." "I see," Claire said, struggling to keep disappointment from her voice. She had known Caleb wouldn't stay indefinitely, yet hearing him speak of leaving so soon still stung. After lunch, Caleb suggested they take a walk, and Claire agreed. The Thompsons exchanged knowing glances, but said nothing as the pair donned coats and stepped outside into the crisp winter air. They walked in silence for a time, following a path that led toward a small creek at the edge of the property. Bare trees stood like sentinels against the blue sky, and their breath formed clouds in the cold air. "You seem settled already," Caleb finally said. "Margaret says her sister is likely to hire you." "Yes," Claire confirmed. "It's a good opportunity. The Thompsons have been incredibly kind." Another silence fell, heavy with unspoken words. "When will you leave?" Claire finally asked. "Tomorrow morning," Caleb replied. "The sooner I go, the sooner I can return." Claire's heart lifted slightly at the confirmation that he intended to come back. "You'll be careful." "My uncle has no reason to suspect me of helping you," Caleb finished. "As far as anyone knows, Newsom drowned in the river. I'm just a rancher going about his business." They reached the creek, its waters partially frozen along the edges. Claire watched the current flowing beneath patches of ice, reminded of how her own life had broken free from its frozen state. "Claire," Caleb said, turning to face her, "there's something I need to tell you before I go." She looked up at him, heart pounding. "Yes." Caleb took a deep breath, his expression serious. "When I found you that night, half frozen in the snow, I never imagined how much my life would change. These past weeks, getting to know you, helping you, watching you face your fears with such courage." He paused, searching for words. "You've come to mean a great deal to me," Claire's breath caught. "Caleb, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know your life has been in turmoil. You're just beginning to find safety, to build something new. The last thing I want is to complicate that for you." His eyes held hers, earnest and warm. "But I would be dishonest if I didn't tell you that my feelings for you have grown beyond friendship, beyond the desire to protect you." The words Claire had both hoped for and feared hung in the air between them. "I'm not asking for anything," Caleb continued. "You need time to heal, to establish yourself here. I respect that completely. But before I leave, I wanted you to know that when I return, it will be for you, if you'll have me." Claire stood speechless, emotions washing through her in waves. Fear, hope, longing, uncertainty all tangled together in her heart. "You don't need to answer now," Caleb said, misinterpreting her silence. "I understand if you don't feel the same or if you need time." "Caleb," Claire interrupted, finding her voice at last. "From the moment you found me, you've shown me nothing but kindness and respect. You risked everything to help me escape. You've given me a chance at a new life." She took a step closer to him. "How could I not have feelings for you?" Hope brightened his eyes. "Truly, truly," she confirmed. "But you're right, my life is still unsettled. I'm still finding my way as Claire Nelson. I need time." "Time is something I can give," Caleb said, reaching out to take her hands in his. "I'll return in 2 weeks. By then, you'll be more established here. We can talk again, see where we stand." Claire nodded, a smile warming her face despite the cold air. "I'll be waiting." Caleb's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in his expression. Answering it, Claire rose slightly on her toes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Something to remember me by," she said softly. Caleb's smile was worth every moment of uncertainty she had endured. "As if I could forget." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Claire stood with the Thompsons as Caleb prepared to depart, his horse saddled and provisions packed. 2 weeks, he reminded her as they said their goodbyes. 2 weeks, Claire echoed, memorizing his face in the morning light. "Be safe." With a tip of his hat and a final smile that seemed meant for her alone, Caleb rode away, following the road that would eventually lead back to Colorado City and his ranch. Claire watched until he disappeared from view, a mixture of hope and trepidation filling her heart. In 2 weeks, Caleb would return and they would decide what future, if any, they might have together. In the meantime, she had a new life to build. The following days passed in a whirl of activity as Claire settled into life in Denver. Margaret's sister, Mrs. Porter, hired her to work in the dress shop after a brief interview, impressed by Claire's fine stitching and quiet, dignified manner. The position paid a modest but fair wage, enough that Claire could begin saving for her own accommodations eventually, though the Thompsons insisted she stay with them as long as she wished. Denver in 1874 was a growing city, still rough around the edges but developing rapidly. Claire found it both intimidating and exciting after the small towns she had known. The streets bustled with people from all walks of life, businessmen in fine suits, laborers, families, cowboys passing through. No one gave a second glance to Claire Nelson, the young widow new to town. She was just another face in the crowd, anonymous, unremarkable, safe. The freedom was intoxicating. For the first time since her parents' deaths, Claire could walk down a street without fear, make decisions without seeking permission, speak her mind without dreading the consequences. Each day brought new confidence as she learned to navigate her new identity and surroundings. Yet despite her growing independence, thoughts of Caleb were never far from her mind. In quiet moments, she found herself wondering where he was, whether he was safe, what reception he had found in Colorado City. Had news of Catherine Newsom's death been accepted? Was her uncle still suspicious? Would Caleb's return to town raise questions? A week into his absence, a letter arrived. Margaret handed it to Claire with a knowing smile, and Claire took it to her room to read in private. "Dear Claire, I hope this finds you well and settling into life in Denver." The journey back was uneventful, and I arrived at the ranch to find everything in order thanks to my neighbor checking on things as promised. Colorado City is much as we left it. Your death is the main topic of conversation, with many expressing sympathy for your uncle's loss. He has been playing the part of the grieving relative convincingly, though Martha, who delivered this letter to the post for me, says he seems more angry than sorrowful in private. I've been careful to behave as normally as possible in town, expressing appropriate shock at the tragic news. No one seems to suspect my involvement. I've arranged to bring 20 head of cattle to Denver next week, which provides a legitimate reason for my return. The cabin seems empty without you. I find myself looking up from my book in the evening, expecting to see you sitting across the table. Even my horse seems to miss your daily treats of apple slices. I think often of our conversation by the creek. I meant every word, Claire, but I stand by my promise to give you time. Your courage continues to inspire me, and I look forward to hearing about your new life when I return. Until then, know that you are in my thoughts. Yours, Caleb. Claire read the letter 3 times, tracing the firm, neat handwriting with her fingertip. His words confirmed what her heart already knew: the connection between them was real, not merely a product of their unusual circumstances. She wrote back that evening, sharing news of her position at the dress shop, her growing friendship with Margaret, her explorations of Denver. She did not explicitly mention her feelings, but her closing line, "The days pass slowly until your return," said enough. When 2 weeks had nearly passed, Claire found herself growing increasingly nervous about Caleb's imminent arrival. Would her feelings remain the same when she saw him again? Would his? Had the reality of returning to his normal life changed his perspective? Margaret noticed her anxiety as they prepared dinner the night before Caleb was expected. "He'll come back," she said gently, as if reading Claire's thoughts. "Daniel says Caleb Crawford isn't a man who makes promises lightly." Claire smiled gratefully. "I know, it's just... everything has happened so quickly. Sometimes I wonder if what I feel is real or if it's just gratitude for his help." "Does your heart beat faster when you think of him?" Margaret asked with a knowing smile. "Do you find yourself smiling at the mention of his name? Do you imagine a future with him in it?" Claire's blush was answer enough. "That's not gratitude, dear," Margaret said kindly. "That's something much more valuable." The next day, Claire found it impossible to concentrate at the dress shop. Mrs. Porter finally laughed and sent her home early, saying her distraction was likely to result in ruined fabric. Claire walked back to the Thompsons' house, rehearsing what she might say when Caleb arrived. So preoccupied was she with her thoughts that she nearly collided with a man standing at the gate. "Excuse me, she began, then froze as she recognized him. "Caleb," he stood before her, hat in hand, looking somewhat trail-worn but smiling that warm smile that made her heart skip. "Hello, Claire." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the 2 weeks of separation falling away as if they had never been. Then Claire stepped forward, propriety forgotten, and threw her arms around him in a heartfelt embrace. Caleb's arms encircled her, strong and sure, and Claire knew with sudden certainty that her feelings hadn't changed, they had only grown stronger in his absence. When they finally stepped apart, both were smiling like fools. "You're early," Claire said, smoothing her skirt self-consciously. Couldn't wait another day, Caleb admitted. The cattle are settled at the stockyards. I came straight here. Claire's heart soared at his words. Have you seen the Thompsons yet? Briefly. Daniel's showing me where to stable my horse. Caleb's expression grew more serious. Claire, I was hoping we might talk. Perhaps a walk like before, she nodded, and they set off down the same path that led to the creek. The day was warmer than when they'd last walked this way, the first hints of spring softening the winter landscape. You look well, Caleb observed. Denver agrees with you. I like it here, Claire confirmed. The work at the dress shop is pleasant and the Thompsons have been so kind. I'm glad, Caleb said sincerely. You deserve happiness after everything you've endured. They reached the creek, which now flowed freely without ice. For a moment, they watched the water in comfortable silence. I've been thinking about what happens next, Caleb finally said. About my ranch, my future. Claire's heart tightened. And Caleb turned to face her. I've decided to sell most of my herd and lease the ranch land to my neighbor. I've spoken with Daniel about opportunities here in Denver. There's growing demand for experienced horsemen to break and train stock for the city's livery stables. Claire stared at him, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. You're staying in Denver. If that's where you are, he said simply. Claire, these past 2 weeks confirmed what I already knew. My life is better with you in it. I don't want to be hundreds of miles away, seeing you only occasionally. I want to be where you are, building a life day by day if you'll have me. Joy bubbled up inside Claire, bright and effervescent. Are you certain? Your ranch is just land and buildings, Caleb finished. I can build again elsewhere someday, if that's what we decide together. The word we sent a thrill through Claire. Caleb Crawford, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Are you courting me? A slow smile spread across his face. I'm trying to, yes. Am I doing a poor job of it? Claire laughed, the sound free and light. On the contrary, I think you're doing very well indeed. Caleb took a step closer, reaching for her hands. Then may I have your permission to court you properly, Miss Claire Nelson, with all the appropriate calls and chaperoned outings society demands. Claire entwined her fingers with his, marveling at how right it felt. You may, Mr. Crawford. Though I should warn you, I may not be a very patient participant in such formalities. His eyes crinkled with amusement. No, and why is that? Because, Claire said, gathering her courage, I already know my heart. I've known it since that night by the fireplace in your cabin when you promised no one would hurt me again. Caleb's expression softened into tenderness. Claire, he murmured, raising one hand to gently touch her cheek. May I kiss you, properly this time? In answer, Claire rose on her toes, meeting him halfway as his lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and Claire's hands rested against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. When they parted, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Claire Nelson. Have since the moment you opened your eyes in my cabin and asked about your feet, Claire laughed softly. Not the most romantic beginning to a love story. I disagree, Caleb said, his eyes warm with affection. I think it's perfect just as it is. As they walked back to the Thompsons' house hand in hand, Claire reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From the terrified young woman running barefoot through the snow to escape her uncle's cruelty, to this moment of perfect contentment beside the man she loved, it seemed almost like a dream. Yet the solid warmth of Caleb's hand around hers was undeniably real, as was the future stretching before them, uncertain in its details, but secure in its foundation of mutual respect, admiration, and love. Catherine Newsom might be dead according to the records of Colorado City, but Claire Nelson was very much alive, her heart beating with newfound purpose and joy. And as Caleb squeezed her hand, smiling down at her with promise in his eyes, Claire knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters of her story were just beginning. Spring bloomed across Denver, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. Claire flourished at the dress shop, her natural eye for design and meticulous needlework earning her increasingly important responsibilities. Mrs. Porter, recognizing her talent, began allowing her to work directly with customers on custom orders, a position that came with a welcome increase in wages. Caleb, true to his word, remained in Denver, finding work with one of the city's largest livery stables. His skill with horses, particularly in gentling difficult animals, quickly made him invaluable to his employer. By May, he had saved enough to rent a small house not far from the Thompsons, establishing himself as a permanent resident of the growing city. Their courtship progressed with a blend of traditional formality and the deep understanding that came from their shared experiences. They attended church together on Sundays, took chaperoned walks in the city's parks, and spent evenings on the Thompsons' porch swing, talking about everything and nothing as the stars appeared overhead. In June, during a picnic by the creek where they had first acknowledged their feelings, Caleb presented Claire with a simple gold ring set with a small pearl. "It's not fancy," he said apologetically as he held it out to her, "but it was my grandmother's. My mother gave it to me before she died, said to save it for the woman who captured my heart completely." Claire's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the delicate ring. "It's perfect, Claire Nelson," Caleb said, taking her hand in his. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. I know we haven't known each other long by conventional standards, but I think we've lived more together in these months than many couples do in years." He took a deep breath. "I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Claire answered without hesitation, her voice steady despite the tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, Caleb Crawford, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Claire marveled at how far they had come from that snowy night in January. She was no longer the frightened, wounded girl running from her past, but a woman standing confidently beside the man she loved, facing their future together. They were married in August in the small church the Thompsons attended, with Daniel serving as Caleb's best man and Margaret standing beside Claire. Mrs. Porter closed the dress shop for the day so that all the employees could attend, and several of Caleb's colleagues from the livery stable came to wish them well. Claire wore a dress of her own design and making simple but elegant, with delicate embroidery at the bodice and sleeves. Caleb, seeing her walk down the aisle toward him, thought she had never looked more beautiful. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with quiet conviction before God and their small circle of friends. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb's kiss was gentle yet full of promise, sealing their commitment to walk through life together. The Thompsons hosted a modest reception at their home, with food and music and congratulations from all who attended. As twilight fell, the newlyweds departed for the small house that would be their first home together, decorated with fresh flowers and stocked with provisions by their thoughtful friends. That night, as Claire lay in Caleb's arms, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. "If anyone had told me on that terrible night that I would end up happily married less than a year later, I would have thought them mad," she murmured. Caleb's arms tightened around her. "Sometimes the worst storms lead us to the safest harbors," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I thank God every day that you found your way to my door, even if the circumstances were dire." "As do I," Claire agreed, nestling closer to her husband's warmth. "It's strange to think that in one sense I had to die to begin living fully." "Catherine Newsom may rest in peace," Caleb said solemnly, "but Claire Crawford has a long and happy life ahead of her." Claire smiled at the sound of her new name. "Claire Crawford," she repeated, liking how it felt on her tongue. "Mrs. Caleb Crawford, my wife," Caleb whispered, wonder in his voice. "My love." Words gave way to tender caresses as they celebrated their union, each touch affirming the bond that had grown between them, a bond forged in crisis, but tempered by mutual respect, admiration, and deepening love. In the years that followed, Caleb and Claire built a life together that exceeded both their dreams. Caleb's reputation with horses grew until he was able to start his own training business, eventually purchasing land on the outskirts of Denver where they built a comfortable home with stables and pastures. Claire continued working at the dress shop until the birth of their first child, a son they named Thomas Daniel, after both their fathers. 2 years later, their daughter Elizabeth Margaret joined the family, named for Claire's mother and their dear friend who had welcomed them in their time of need. A second son, James, completed their family 3 years after that. As the children grew, Claire began designing clothing from home, developing a small but loyal clientele who appreciated her elegant yet practical creations. By the time Thomas was 10, she had established her own modest dress shop not far from their home, allowing her to balance her work with family responsibilities. They never returned to Colorado City, though they maintained correspondence with Martha Wilson until her death in 1885. Through her, they learned that Gerald Blackwood had eventually remarried, moved to San Francisco, and died in the earthquake of 1906, news that Claire received with complicated emotions but no real grief. Catherine Newsom remained legally dead, a ghost from the past that occasionally crossed Claire's mind on cold winter nights. But those memories grew less painful with time, softened by the joy and security she found in her life with Caleb. On a crisp January evening in 1898, 25 years after Caleb had found Claire collapsed in the snow, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Their children were grown now, Thomas working alongside his father in the horse business, Elizabeth teaching at the local school, and James studying medicine in Boston. "Do you ever regret it?" Claire asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Leaving your ranch, starting over in Denver?" Caleb looked at his wife, her dark hair now threaded with silver but her eyes still bright with intelligence and warmth. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band that adjoined the pearl engagement ring all those years ago. "Not for a single moment," he answered truthfully. "Everything I've built here, our home, our business, our family, it's beyond anything I could have imagined that night I found a half-frozen woman at the edge of my property." Claire smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Who would have thought that running barefoot through the snow would lead me to the greatest happiness of my life?" Caleb pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his heart full. "I thank God every day that I was there to wrap those frozen feet and ask who hurt you. And I thank God for giving me the courage to answer honestly," Claire replied, "to trust you when trust seemed impossible." As darkness settled around them and the first stars appeared overhead, they sat together in the peaceful silence of long married couples who no longer need many words to communicate their deepest feelings. Their life together hadn't been without challenges or sorrows, but they had faced each one side by side, their bond strengthening with each passing year. From desperate beginnings had come a lifetime of love, proof that sometimes the darkest nights truly do lead to the brightest dawns. And as Caleb and Claire Crawford walked hand in hand into their home, closing the door against the growing chill of the winter evening, both carried the quiet certainty that the warmth they had found together would sustain them for all the days to come.